Without further ado, we shall proceed to the next agenda, which is the keynote address by Sri Dr Jemilah Mahmood, who is the Professor and Executive Director at Sunway Center for Planetary Health and Pro-Chancellor of the Heriot Ward University, Malaysia. I'm afraid that Sri is unable to join us for the session today due to pressing matters, but she has graciously provided us a video recording of a keynote address. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Sri Jemilah Mahmood.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this invitation and the opportunity to address all of you in this first Chevening Alumni Summit. I'm somewhat in awe, having read up in preparation for today. I learned that since 1984, 1,700 of you have gone through the scholarship program. That's a lot of people. And that's a lot of leadership talent. I'm also delighted to be here for several reasons. I myself had a UK education. I had my specialist medical training in the United Kingdom. I really like cold weather. My engagement with Chevening scholars over the years has been universally positive and often joyous. And I recognize that the UK is really second to none when it comes to learning and the application of knowledge to problems. One only has to think about the work done by academia, working hand in glove, pardon the pun, with the private sector in the search for a vaccine for the coronavirus as evidence. But perhaps the key attraction for me what was included in the concept note for this event. Let me quote from it. Through the summit, we aim to highlight the Chevening effect of alumni on nation building in Malaysia since the introduction of the Chevening Award in Malaysia in 1984. The CAM Summit also intends to be an avenue for the alumni to discuss key challenges and solutions such as climate change, public policy, and innovation. And so, to the subject of this summit, Bangkit Semula, which translates as rise again. Rise indeed we must, and recover we will. But perhaps we need to think a little about how we rise again, because again, somehow implies a return to the status quo ante. Ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has wrought a new phrase and a new desire that we get back to normal as soon as possible. Let's just stop and think about that for a moment. My own view is that the pandemic has provided us with a collective opportunity to think about what an ideal normal looks like. It certainly is not what we had before the start of 2020. Our politically correct non-alarmist labels for what frankly amounts to the most acute existential crisis we have faced since the beginning of humanity's presence on the planet simply won't do as we come out of the pandemic. This is not climate change. It is a code red for humanity, a crisis that has roots in climate, but which is already manifesting in some very scary outcomes. It is a crisis of overconsumption, of overpopulation, of naked greed, of ecological and climatological rape, of rampant corruption and rent-seeking behaviors for those and by those we seem to be unable to hold to account. It is a crisis of inequity and inequality. Just look at how the vaccine programs differ between the rich and poor nations of the world. Are we even surprised that a new mutation has arisen in Africa? It is a crisis of dependency on fossil fuels, driven largely by the large corporations that lobby governments to maintain subsidies on fossil fuels rather than investing in green solutions. If you don't believe me, take a look in our own backyard. Malaysia had around 300 electric car charging stations as of last year. China had 807,000. We are not a poor country, and yet we are lagging behind others in getting our carbon emissions down. In fact, they're going up. It is a crisis with severe humanitarian consequences: climate migration, food and water scarcity, human and planetary health degradation, and economic recession. Let me put a simple proposition forward. COVID-19 is a dress rehearsal for what is to come. This was not the first, and it will surely not be the last pandemic that we face, nor is it likely to be the deadliest if we carry on as we are. The business as usual attitude that we now see rearing its head once again as pandemic restrictions are slowly eased is mind-bogglingly contradictory. On the one hand, we know that we must reduce carbon emissions. On the other, we are all continually dependent on fossil fuels to satisfy our insatiable desire to travel, spurred on by companies that are quite understandably driven by the need to get their bottom lines back to health. But this drive for financial health, which has now been with us throughout the ages, but which has assumed gargantuan and rapacious proportions in the last 50 years, is what has led to this pandemic in the first place, with zoonotic leaks and an increasingly gaping imbalance of our natural ecosystem, all caused by our endless and unsustainable desire for profit, for things. So my point is that as much as we would like to go back to the pre-pandemic days of normal, it is time to recognize and admit that our normal was never healthy in the first place. And you may notice that I used the word health several times already. Financial health, human health, planetary health. These facets of health all exist, but are not actually things we find in hospitals or doctors' surgeries. Health is universal. The term healthy in itself tends to encapsulate the health sector, when in fact, we need all professions, all disciplines and sectors to work together towards a broader understanding of what health is and how we all collectively must nurture it, be it planetary, human, financial, or other. But instead, many of our social and economic achievements have come at the expense of the health of the planet, including responding to COVID-19. Mortality rates have fallen dramatically over the last century, and the creation and funding of healthcare systems has provided us with a kind of lifespans our great-grandparents simply didn't have. And as for COVID-19, within a year, we developed a vaccine that has mitigated the worst effects of this virus and are slowly emerging into a post-pandemic world, we hope. And so we have seen human development improve our health, but at what cost? The trade-offs are frightening. Pollution so dense in some cities in our region that life expectancies are once again reducing. 7 million people dying as a result of air pollution. Toxicity in our seas and rivers, and plastic inside the food that we are now ingesting, carrying carcinogens. An epidemic of obesity brought about by cheap processed foods, largely purchased by people who find themselves at the wrong end of the equity stakes that our current economic and social systems promote. Forest fires at a scale not seen in human history, melting ice caps, sea level rise, and new and frightening changes to our weather patterns. The changes to our consumption patterns are all contributing to the global burden of disease. COVID-19 has shown us no one is safe until everyone is safe. Massive inequality between the haves, who shoot themselves now quite literally into space, and the have-nots who die in conflicts or suffer the daily fear of being murdered in unpoliced slums in so many cities across the planet. And at the same time, loss of trust in politics is rife. Political legitimacy is on the wane. Ethno-nationalism is on the increase, and those who shout loudest win the day. Consequently, Access to rights and justice are increasingly compromised, and efforts to improve the health of the planet and the people who live on it take a back seat. And this is what happened at COP26, in my view. The popular view is that Glasgow kept the 1.5 degrees Celsius target alive, but its success will only be determined if countries indeed honor their pledges after COP26, if they are not influenced by industry lobbying to water down commitments and make their commitments even more ambitious for COP27. That's the popular view. My own perspective is a bit more glum, despite the clarity of the evidence staring all of us in our faces. Even though there are other ways to approach our stewardship of this planet, the proverbial can has been kicked once again down the road. Politicians speak of achievements in the climate change race made in the last 20 years, and it's true, we have come a long way. But the distance we can kick the can gets shorter with each passing year. Ladies and gentlemen, as we slowly emerge from the pandemic, what kind of country do we want to be? How equitable, how just? And here I feel and I fear we are a bit stuck. We made strong commitments at COP26, but our economy remains highly reliant on fossil fuels, both for revenue and production of goods and services. Our adaptation away from fossil fuels is slow compared to what others have done and invested heavily, largely through the private sector, in building that infrastructure needed for electric vehicles, solar power, etc. We are getting going on this, but it's still slow, and we need to accelerate our efforts. The tax rates on new electric vehicles included in the new budget speech are a step in the right direction. I welcome this. But we live beyond the boundaries of what the planet and this land that we call home can sustainably provide for us. And I think that the reality is our rivers, our coastlines are littered with single-use plastics. And the air is often not good for our health. Only during the lockdown did we manage to see the blue skies. And our cities are really often wasteful and inefficient. And our exposure as a nation to the increasingly robust international debate on planetary health in all its manifestations is limited. And our media shows little interest in doing anything about that. And our politics, well, let me be diplomatic. I think all of us acknowledge it's challenging, it's confusing, and we are exhausted. But there are signs of hope. The 12th Malaysia Plan is a visionary document in many ways, although as with everything else, the challenge will be in the implementation. And when it comes down to it, we all know that evidence suggests that change comes most rapidly when it's driven by popular expression rather than political discourse. And the shift that we need to make now needs to be swift and decisive. The choices we make are what makes this nation our home. But it seems to me that the decisions we make about our daily lives are currently disconnected with the kind of society we want to live in. We need to connect our consciousness to that of the broader environment in which we live, and that takes effort. It takes frequent pause for thought, and often a fair degree of compromise. But most of all, it takes leaders, all leaders, including yourselves, to lead and influence others. Planetary health is an integrated way of improving our relationship with planet Earth. It focuses on achieving the highest attainable standards of health, well-being, and equity worldwide, all within safe environmental limits. It requires a much stronger focus on how our political, economic, and social systems must change to truly protect us and the Earth's natural systems so that both can thrive. Adopting a planetary health approach to how our country moves forward is what we need, is what will set us on a course where we find the right balance. And I think that in many countries in the world, much work is already underway, and even here, to make our cities more sustainable and addressing the inefficiencies in food systems, dealing with factors that cause COVID-19 so that we can in future better manage pandemics and where possible, eliminate them. Planetary Health is also looking at how we make economies fairer so that we can respect the boundaries of what the planet can provide while also living comfortably and sustainable in a sustainable way. And of course, tackling the climate emergency must be a top priority. We have the tools to make all these things happen. And we know that progress is going to be hard. But if decisions are left only to those in power, without due reference to most of us who just want to live simple, sustainable, equitable lives, things will not change. So I stand here before you today to ask for your help. Remember that selection criteria for Chevening Scholarship aims to identify high caliber graduates with the personal, intellectual, and interpersonal qualities necessary for leadership. Leadership has never been more needed than it is now. I'm really hopeful that the Sunway Center for Planetary Health that I've now established at Sunway University can really support emerging leaders in Malaysia, including all of you, across all realms of our nation's dynamism, in charting forward a path that is meaningful and equitable. But what does that look like? Well, I'm informed that you'll be focusing on 3 sets of issues during this summit: strategic outlook on Malaysia, key challenges and opportunities for an equitable future, entrepreneurship and innovation, harnessing innovation-driven entrepreneurship towards economic growth, climate and sustainability, delivering climate action from policy to grassroots for people, planet, and prosperity. And as you do so, may I ask that you think about planetary health considerations in each of these discussions so that the summit outcome document can be shared with my team and I at the Sunway Center for Planetary Health so that we can gain a clearer understanding of what it is that we can add in terms of value to dialogue around these 3 issues. We tend to argue and, tell ourselves this is complex stuff, complicated science, tough to follow policy. It doesn't need to be. Everything is ultimately translatable. It's just knowing how to do it. And this is what we hope to do, and to break down the silos between health, crisis, and economy, and to issue and support an urgent, clear, and simple call to action for planetary health, and the first of its kind within this region and beyond. Your engagement will be key. You are scholars because you showed leadership qualities. Please help us by using your skills to ensure that the health of people and planet are harmonized. After all, science shows us that the planet can and will recover from the damage we have inflicted upon it. And it can do so in so many ways. But we have to ask ourselves whether we will be there to see that. So I really wish all of you a really successful camp. I really hope that we will continue the conversation. Many of you here are dear friends to me. Let's work together because there is no planet B. Thank you very much, everyone.